Hey guys, Nick here with Aces Customs. Now in a previous video, we had just finished installing the Aces intake on this 351 Windsor that we put inside this 1966 Ford F100. Now, today is part 2, the part 3 series, for installing the rest of the Aces EFI kit. And here we have the ignition and fuel system for the intake. So today is going to be a very technical day. We have a lot of work to get done, so stay tuned. And let's go. So as you guys see in our menagerie of a lineup of parts, first is going to be the distributor. Now Aces has a distributor that does not have a vacuum actuated timing advance on it, but instead it has a lot more range of motion because a lot of it's computer controlled. Now, for a lot of people who don't know how to set up the timing on a 351 Windsor, it's a little different from everybody's favorite Chevy small block. So step one is to make sure that your number one piston, Ford, it's on the front left cylinder, is at top dead center. And by doing that, the way we can tell is by spinning the crank and keeping an eye on the pressure, the air pressure that comes out of the spark plug hole. And once you have that set, then you can set up your distributor for the rest of the ignition timing. So after you have your block set to top dead center, then you can take your distributor. Now, you'll have to take the cap off the distributor so you can know where your rotor button is pointing. Now, luckily, I did this all beforehand so that way we can get this show on the road. So, once you have top dead center, your rotor button is supposed to face directly down the intake. So that way, you have enough ignition timing to be able to set the rest of the motor. So, with all that being said, so after you have your motor set to top dead center and you have your distributor set into the block, and you have your rotor button set in the right direction, you then take your distributor cap and line up the number one point with the rotor button. So that way you are then top dead center on your ignition timing. And from there, we can then move on to the next component. All right, and with the distributor set in, we can now move on to the next part, which is the throttle body. Everyone's favorite, ooh, ah, shiny, right? So, the throttle body that Aces gives you looks fantastic, but they also give you all the necessary sensors for their system to run, and they're compatible with all the OE stuff that you used to run on these 80s and 90s blocks. So now I'm going to show you the step-by-step on how to assemble and install the throttle body to the block. All right, so the first sensor we'll be installing on the throttle body will be the throttle position sensor. Now, with Aces, they provide the screws and the sensors for the throttle body. So installing this makes it real easy, but don't lose the screws. The screws are really difficult to get. So from here, it looks like a lot of these parts are going to require really small hex head sockets. So make sure you have those handy. Now it's important to note that the throttle position sensor has little keys in it to conform to the key that's on the throttle body. So to install like such, make sure your keys line up with the knob that's on the throttle body. Once you do that, you will need to apply a little bit of twisting pressure so that way you can then set your screws. All right, so the next sensor we'll be installing on the throttle body will be the idle air control valve. Now, at a distance, it may look like you can put this either way, but don't let it fool you. There is a shorter distance to the right than there is to the left, so the sensor can only go one direction. And all you have to do is just push it in, so that way the O-ring sits properly, and then you take your two screws that also use the 9/64 Allen key, and then tighten it down to the throttle body. All right, and the final sensor we have to install on the throttle body is the map sensor. So you turn the throttle body around to see this little port on the backside. You take your map sensor and real simply push it in. And that is the installation of the map sensor. So now all we have to do is take this bad boy and throw her on the motor. All right, and with our throttle body complete, we can now install it onto the intake. And kindly enough, Aces provides a gasket for this very situation. So it's real simple. Put the gasket down and then put the throttle body right on top of it. And then from there, we can get our hardware and tighten her all down. All right, and the hardware we'll be using to install the throttle body is going to be a set of 5/16 by 18 bolts that are an inch long, and all we have on top of it is just a flat washer. So we'll start by hand threading all the bolts into the intake so we can make sure that there is no obstruction to the threads while installation is occurring. All right. Once we got everything pretty much settled in place, we can then take our 13 wrench and tighten down the bolts. All right, and now with the throttle body installed, we can move on to my favorite part, fuel logs. All right, so here we have the entire assembly for the fuel logs and injector systems. Here we have our beautiful, beautiful fuel logs. You can see right through it. And we have our set of 8 injectors. Now remember, all these parts are easily interchangeable with parts you can find at the parts store. So you don't have to always call Aces to get your parts back. All right, so we're going to start the assembly of the fuel logs. So I'm going to begin by taking a set of injectors out for the fuel log. Now, everybody knows it's 4 injectors for a fuel log because we're rocking with a old school classic American V8 muscle motor. But besides the point, fuel logs only have 4 ports, so we only need 4 injectors. So we'll start by taking our injectors and going the O-ring to the fuel log with a little bit of oil. So that way it's easy to go in, and if you need to backtrack and make sure everything's right, it's easy to take out. But not too much, because then it starts to slip out, okay? So when you start, you just take your injector, just give her a little push, and it's installed. So bear with me as I finish dealing with the rest of these injectors. And this is what your fuel log should look like after you finish installing all the injectors to it. Now, the biggest thing to note is that your fuel logs are ambidextrous. So it doesn't matter which direction you install your injectors, because they can go either this way or they can go this way. You can do them this way or this way or this way, and they'll still be in the right direction. So you don't have to worry about any sort of confusion there. So bear with me as I install this other set of injectors on this other fuel log. So following the trend of all the kits so far for all the other parts is they supply their own hardware. So just like everything else, the fuel logs have their own hardware. And they provide 2 sets of bolts, one that requires an Allen key and the one that requires a 10 mil, a set of nuts for the brackets for the fuel logs, as well as brackets for the fuel logs. And I'll be showing you how they want you to install the brackets on the intake. So you take 2 of your brackets, or you take a bracket, and you come over here to the motor, and you want to set the bracket away from the motor, or away from the intake, because these are the hold downs for the fuel logs. So you'll want it to set just like this, right? The intake even has its own indents for this piece. So once you get your piece in place, you then take your bolt and you thread it into the block, just like this. And from there, you can tighten down all 4 of the bolts, and then we can install the fuel logs. Okay. And with the installation of the brackets, these are how they should face. These are how they should look. So when you install the fuel logs, you can then slide the Allen key head bolts right through here, so that way everything can stay nice and tight. So follow me over here. We'll take one of our fuel logs, as well as 2 of our Allen key screws, and walk back over to the block. And we will just ever so carefully set all the injectors into place. And then with a little bit of downforce, we'll set the injectors into the spots they need to be on the intake. All right, so here we have the fuel log fully installed on the intake. Now it's a thing to note that you will need a 10mm wrench, as well as a 3/16 Allen key for the installation of the fuel rails. Both the bolt that goes into the intake, as well as the bolt that goes onto the back of the Allen key bolt use a 10 millimeter, and obviously the Allen key bolt uses a 3/16 Allen key. So be patient as I install the other side, and we will move on to the next step of this process. All right, Allen key screw on the front side to the back side. And there she is. We'll do that to the back as well. And we will then grab the hardware, i.e. the nuts that were supplied with the ACES kit, to then screw onto the back of the Allen key screws, so that way everything stays in place and the injectors don't go flying. All right, and now that we have these beautiful fuel rails installed, we can then move on to the rest of the fuel management system, which is finishing the routing. So with the installation of these, we can then take our fuel bridge, which they graciously provide to us, and mock it up to the back of the block. Now, the reason why I say we have to mock this up to the back of the block is because we cannot run this on the front of the block, because there's obviously a distributor in the way. So we have to take this and run it around back, right? And from the way it looks pretty snazzy, right? So to install the fuel bridge, they provided several AN fittings that fit perfectly to the fuel log. So they gave us 3 of these adapters for the fuel log as well as the incoming fuel, and one stop log, or one stop piece for the end of one of the logs. So stay tuned and I will show you how we intend to route this fuel so that we can get this motor to fire off. All right, and with the installation of the fittings on the fuel logs, you can now see that we have the sole intentions of running our fuel bridge from the backs of both of the logs to each other, and we are planning on routing the fuel from the front passenger side of the motor. We put the block-off plug on the front driver's side fuel log because of routing, and when installing these, you do not need an egregious amount of force to tighten these down. They are AN fittings, they are aluminum, they will rip threads super easy. So when installing these, don't put a whole ugga-dugga on it. You can do one ugga and maybe half a dugga, but no ugga-dugga. So I'm gonna throw this on the back and we will do our final overview of this motor. All right, and that is it. We have our ignition system as well as our fuel management systems installed on the 351 Windsor in the 66 Ford F100. It is a very simple process if you understand the systems, but even if you don't, they do provide plenty of instruction with all their kits. So, thank you for hanging out with me, and I look forward to you guys watching us install another ACES kit on the 1959 Chevy Corvette. So with all being said, see you later.